Sarah, welcome to In Her Shoes. Thank you so much for being here.
So nice to see you.
Where are you today?
I'm in Boston, Massachusetts.
Awesome. Is this home for you? I feel like it's home for you.
This is home for me.
Yeah. All your life, Sarah, has been brought up in Boston, or is this a new thing?
Well, it's not new. I've lived here for 23 years, so I feel like it's home now. I came here for university and then I didn't leave. I love Boston so much. I have our T map on my wall.
I love it. I did wonder what that was when we spoke earlier. So nice to get that clarified.
Yeah.
Well, look, I'm so happy to have you on the show, and thank you so much for being a guest. I think In Her Shoes is something that we were introduced through my lovely co-producer Caroline, and when I heard about you and your story and the things that you're doing, I just thought, I've got to speak to this woman. She's just a powerhouse. And so there's probably a lot of people that will know you who are listening to this, and then some that don't know you, and I'd love to give them a bit of an intro into who you are. So just a bit of an elevator pitch from you. Who is Sarah?
Oh gosh. An elevator pitch of who I am. Well, I'm currently the chief operating officer at NP Digital, which is an award-winning marketing agency. We're worldwide and we're all 100% remote, which is pretty unique. I live in Boston with my family. I have a husband and a dog and two kids. I think people would describe me as a high energy person, and also someone who is kind of a get it done type of person. And hopefully they think I'm funny. I mean, that's one of my core tenets about myself, but who knows how people would describe me.
I love
And,
it.
yeah.
Awesome. Look, I think that, you mentioned a few things there. One being that you are, a powerhouse, you are a C-level executive, you're also a mum. And all of those things combined, I just think are incredibly powerful. And I want to take us back all the way to like early Sarah. And I want to understand, when you think about Sarah when you were young, what did success mean for you in those very early years?
Sure. So I think that what's really specific about my story is that I didn't have a real sense of what I wanted to be when I grew up. There was no calling for me. I didn't want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. There was nothing that was a profession where I thought to myself, yeah, I'm super interested in that. What success meant to me when I was fairly young was this sort of vague idea that I would work in an office and I would go out to lunch, really, when I was quite young. And then as I went through adolescence, maybe that morphed into, and I had enough money to be able to buy a house and some clothes and go out to eat and travel. So it was pretty amorphous for basically most of my adolescence and even very early on in my career. Again, I wasn't really striving towards a specific industry or title or set of responsibilities. What was most interesting to me for my entire life was learning and being challenged, figuring something out, fixing it or solving the problem, and then moving on to the next thing. And that's really what I enjoyed and what I looked for throughout my entire life, even when I was really young. But there wasn't an end point. I'm also still not sure there's an end point now. I think that that's just
I
how I
It's
operate.
so weird. It's so weird you say that. I was actually having a conversation last night with a friend, and we were saying about growth and how you're constantly growing and constantly evolving, and you're always on to the next thing. You aspire or you dream to be something or get something, but once you have it, it's like, what's next? Does that ever stop? And to your point, I don't think it does.
I don't think so either. I think maybe for some people, but definitely not for me.
And when you're young, Sarah, was it at home? Was it mum and dad at home? What did like family structure look like for you?
Sure. So it was mom and dad, but I did lose my father fairly young. So he's deceased. And I do think that that's also part of my story because I was essentially raised in a single mother household. And that was really great from a developmental standpoint. I had a really strong female figure in my life, and that was really good. But obviously, that comes with its own set of trauma and obstacles and things like that to overcome. And again, I think that piece for me really instilled that I had to be independent. There wasn't really a choice, and I had to make my own way in the world. My mom's really supportive and really proud of everything that I've accomplished and done. But that set of circumstances, I do think, really shaped the way that I function.
Wow, I didn't know that part of your story actually, and sorry to hear about your dad, but I can also imagine, like you're saying, almost like that survival instinct kicks in, and it probably kicked in at a really young age. I read somewhere that they say that grief is that defining moment of when you turn from adolescence into an adult, because life just hits you, the reality of it just hits you. So, you know, incredible that you were able to take all of that energy and turn it and fuel it into the person that you are today. And did you have siblings? What was that like?
I do have some siblings, but they're not really in my life because of the age difference. So I'm the youngest. And so I did essentially grow up for most of my life in my house alone I was sort of raised as a single child because of the age differential. And I think also that's kind of interesting, right? Like I have siblings, but I was essentially raised as an only child. And again, it was just me and my mom. And then at one point, my mom's mom came to live with us. And so it was
Wow.
really like a female household, which was really nice because I think that there were sort of no traditional gender roles in my life right at home.
Mm.
I was just surrounded by women, and it was, women were responsible for everything and did everything. And, that was probably very impactful to me in a way that I
Yeah.
don't realize now, because my assumption throughout my entire childhood and adolescence, and I also went to an all girls boarding school
All right.
for high school, right? So my entire first 18 years are like, well, women do everything. And this is just the reality of my world. I don't really understand that it's different in other places. And now,
Right.
actually, looking back and reflecting, I realize that might be pretty unique to other people's circumstances.
Right. And so when you're growing up and you're having this kind of female household, essentially women are doing everything, everything from household to business to finances, just everything, the full 360 is being run by women. Is there a pivotal person in your life where you looked at them and thought, that's incredible. I aspire to that, or almost like the poster, the poster woman for your life?
I don't actually think so. I really respect and appreciate everything that my mom was able to accomplish. She's been an independent business owner, but it's a different type of success. But I actually don't think that I thought of female role models in my uh, very close life that way. I was certainly surrounded by really great women teachers and pieces like that. But in school, I was super interested in Marie Curie and everything that she was able to accomplish in a time that
Yeah.
was very difficult, I think, for women to be successful. So I don't know. I had a weird obsession with her, and I really looked up to her
Did
when I
you?
was a child. Yes. But I didn't become a scientist because I'm
Yeah.
not that smart, but that's okay.
No, but also it kind of speaks to, and we'll definitely get into it, kind of your journey in the sense of, and I don't want to jump to kind of probably 2 to 3 milestones ahead in terms of your career where you were managing like a group of 20 somethings and what that must have felt like. But you were in some way responsible for their growth and their development, and so having impact in the world I feel like is a thread of, it's a thread of you, and you probably give it back in different ways, maybe not how Marie Curie did, but just in ways that mean something to you in the way that you can give back.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the other piece I think that's an important part of my puzzle is that I was raised Jewish. And so part of that is this idea of tikkun olam, which is to heal the world or make the world a better place. And you can make the world a better place through lots of different ways, right? Like with your work or with your volunteering. And for me, it's always been a very specific people approach of
Right.
how do I build these people up and make them better, and help them develop, help them be successful in their career. And so it's been a very one-to-one type of investment for me. And I think that that's sort of the common thread as well. I think the people piece is really what it is for me.
I completely agree with that, because I also think that leaders are, the best leaders are the ones where they're building you up, they're building other people up so that they can run on their own and be better humans, rather than, I think sometimes there's this misconception about leadership being all about the leader itself, borderline like a dictatorship. You exist to make me better, but actually leadership is turning that mirror back around and saying, no, I want you to look at yourself and how can I help you be better.
For sure. I mean, I personally subscribe to the servant leader mentality. And I think that for me, what works is to flip the org chart upside down and consider that it's more like a tree. So I'm at the bottom and I'm the roots supporting all of the people as they kind of go up and grow. And really my job is about development and enablement rather than a dictatorship. I think a dictatorship works for some people. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, agreed. I love that. And you went on to study maths and French at university. What made you choose that?
So kind of, it was accidental. So I originally went to undergrad wanting to go into international relations. I was really interested in that type of work. I was potentially wanting to work for the State Department. And I got through some of the introductory courses for international relations. And I realized that I really did not want to do this. I didn't appreciate how illogical it was. So it was being presented as a social science, but really there's nothing particularly scientific about it. It's a lot of theory and it's not based on a lot of things. And I am a very logical person. And at the time I had been fairly advanced in the math credits that I had coming into undergrad. And I had wasted the first 2 years of my undergrad thinking that I wanted to do international relations. And then I realized that I needed enough credits to graduate. And I had a ton of credits in math. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll just finish this degree because it's already halfway done. And that's how I ended up with a math degree. But I never really wanted to go into a mathematics field. What I find appealing about mathematics is that it's solving a problem within a universe that has a set number of rules, which is essentially how I view the world at large. So you learn whatever the system is and whatever company that you're in or whatever social situation you're in, and then you're moving about in that situation. And that's just what math is. It's a set of rules and then you solve issues. And I really liked that, but there was no way that I was going to become an actuary or do further math work and become a math professor. That was not on the table for me. For me, it was, how do I finish my undergrad degree? And the French piece was fairly similar. I came in with a lot of French credits. I had gone to a bilingual French-English elementary school. So I had a ton of French credits coming in. And I was like, well, I just have enough credits. Let's just do this. But I think that for me, undergrad was not really, again, about figuring out what my career was going to be or what I was particularly passionate about. It was, well, I thought I was really passionate about this thing. That turned out to be very wrong. And now how do we finish out these last 2 years and get a degree? Because as you know, university in America is fairly expensive. And so we had to get it done in 4 years. There wasn't a choice.
What's your opinion on, because I feel quite strongly about this, university or college isn't for everybody, right? And I don't feel that we're given enough support in our late teens to be able to make the right decisions on whether we want to go into that that ecosystem where we're going to walk out with shoulder loads full of debt. How do you feel about that? And also, were you guided in that direction, or was it something based on kind of the credits that you had, you thought this probably just makes sense? Did you think that there was another option outside of college?
I think there's another option outside of college for lots of different people. And I don't think that a lot of people should go to college. I think that in America, there's not enough emphasis put on some of the skilled jobs, like being a plumber or an electrician or a chef, and being an apprentice and training up and doing that work. I think that probably there's a fair number of people that went to college in the United States that would be happier, more fulfilled doing that type of work. And I think it's unfortunate that we don't have a really strong apprenticeship model in the United States like they do. I think Europe does a pretty good job with this, to be honest with you. That said, college was the only option for me because, again, I didn't really know what I liked. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I think, again, if I had said, well, it would be super fun to be an electrician, I would have done that work and then realized I don't really want to be an electrician. And now I've, again, wasted 2 years of my life learning the skill set. And so college was really the only option for me because it gave me some years to try and understand myself a little bit. I think the other piece is it's really hard sometimes for folks to go from high school to college. And I do envy some of my peer set that took a gap year or took some time to volunteer, or, you know, you can work, do Peace Corps, stuff like that. I kind of wish that I had done that and discovered myself a little bit more at 18, because I probably wouldn't have ended up going down the international relations route that I did initially.
It's so interesting you say that, because I resonate a lot. I think that, you know, when I was younger, I didn't have a very clear route in terms of what I personally wanted to do. My parents, you know, were in the legal field, and so for me, going into the law realm was almost just like familiar, and so it felt like the right thing to do. I dropped out after the first year because I was like, I can't do this. This just isn't going to be for me. Sitting at a desk, you know, it just, again, similarly to kind of the international relations piece that you were saying about logic and all of those things, I struggle with the justice system. And so I know I'm not sure. I don't think that this would be the right area for me. I was a builder when I was younger, like as in not a construction builder, but I know a lot of young people play with Barbies, but I played with Lego. I liked to build things. And I think that translated into my young adult years where I really wanted to build a business. And so I just feel that even if you hone those skills, or those skills are picked up on kind of, you know, in your mid-teens, late teens, actually you'd be better off saying, actually, based on your skill set, this could be the right path for you, rather than kind of trying to push somebody into a field that perhaps isn't. And as you say, you kind of go ahead then and waste time. But the gap year was interesting because I also didn't take a gap year, and I very much envy a lot of the people that did take that, because similar to you also, I had this need to survive when I was younger. You know, I didn't come from a ton of wealth growing up, and actually everything that we made was kind of on our own. And I think that's also why I'm so proud of the success today, is that you get there from grassroots and you build and you build and you build. But now I look back and I just think, God, if I had taken that time, what would that have done for me mentally? How would it have expanded my mindset? But that said, I've made sure I've taken some time out now in my later years to be able to go and do those things. And the experiences are definitely different, but I can appreciate why it's so beneficial for somebody to take a gap year between school and college.
For sure. I also think that part of it for me with the gap year that I think is a common thread is I had a pretty good sense of who I am and what my strengths and weaknesses are from a fairly young age. I have a pretty defined sense of self that's been fairly consistent over my life. And that was helpful for me navigating my early career. However, I do think that spending the time in your late adolescence to really learn who you are and what you're good at, and also where your weaknesses are, can be very helpful navigating a career, especially a career that is not super defined. Not I am going to be a software engineer and that is what I'm going to do because I'm super passionate about it. If you're not super passionate about a specific subject area, then you need to know who you are so that you can navigate pieces. And that's the piece that I think, probably looking back, I could have spent just even a little bit more time on.
So when you finished your studies, in the optimum time that you needed to. You went on to get an FA role at Morgan Stanley. How did that come about? What was that, something that was provided through the university, or did you actively source that?
Well, I graduated from undergrad and I moved into an apartment in the same town that I went to undergrad in. And I was working at the university in IT support. So I was fixing professors' computers.
Wow.
So fun. But I needed to make just a little bit more money to make rent. Really, like the rent was very hard because I went to undergrad in Boston, and so I needed to make a little bit more money. And so I started to just interview widely, essentially everywhere. There was no rhyme or reason. It was completely salary based, and I interviewed at Morgan Stanley. I was not particularly passionate about finance, but I understood that it was a training program. It was going to give me some corporate experience. It paid the amount of money that I needed in order to live where I wanted to live. And I interviewed, and then I was talking to my cousin who lives in New York, and he was saying, it's a good organization. It has really solid development programs. You're going to learn a lot, and it's a great first job to have on your resume, even if you don't care, Sarah, even if like this is not the dream job, this is a good first step for you. And he was right. And I really didn't like the job at all. And I realized that after about a year that it wasn't the right role for me. But I learned a ton. It was a really good introduction to corporate America. I mean, I wore a suit every day at 22.
And did you get lunch?
I got lunch. Yeah, I got lunch. And so basically my childhood dreams were complete, right? I worked in a cubicle. I wore a suit. I had a briefcase because my mother gave me a briefcase as my college graduation gift. And I went to lunch and I was like, well, this is it. I've checked all the boxes of this imaginary checklist that I had in my head. But it wasn't right for me. I was actually very miserable at that job. Yeah. And so then I, started to explore what the other options were. And I leaned fairly heavily on my network and, talking with people and pieces like that. And I ended up at an organizational development consulting firm that I was at for a while. And then my boss left and he went to another OD firm and I followed him. And he was very instrumental. Sean Costa, shout out Sean Costa. He was very instrumental as a mentor for me in my very early career. And I was very close to him for a long time, even after I left working for him, because he really helped me develop as a business person. He was just such an incredible manager, leader, and mentor. And I think that's also very important because, one of the things that you said at the start is what were some of the female leaders or people in your life that you really looked up to? And female empowerment is super important, and having, women that you can talk to is super important, but also you can't always be choosy. So there weren't that's the point. You couldn't be choosy back then, right? Right. You couldn't be choosy back then. Is men were in all the VP positions. So in my early career, all of my bosses were men and all of their bosses were men and all of the CEOs were men. And that's what it was. And Sean was really great, is really great. And he was so helpful. But again, like he and I clicked. There was a sense of chemistry and understanding that worked for a mentorship position. And I think he was really important for me in navigating, I would say, my career up until my mid to late 20s.
Oh, wow. So it's really instrumental, I think, to have somebody that believes in you as an individual, pairing that with your own self-belief and your kind of resilience, tenacity, and all of the key attributes that make you successful is almost like that ingredient pot to catapult you to kind of the next levels as you progress in your career. You started as well, you did a few kind of individual contributor roles, and then you moved into a manager role. How was that shift going from an IC to a manager?
Yeah, that was a really big change in my career. So I had eventually ended up at Forrester Research, which
Yeah.
is a market research company. And I was in an individual contributor role, and Forrester was great for lots of different reasons. But I did feel fairly stuck in my career. So there wasn't a ton of mobility laterally or vertically. And Forrester's fairly large, publicly traded, bureaucratic organization. And it's a really great place to work. But I wanted a challenge. And I think that
Mm.
part of what ended up happening in a lot of different parts of my career is I got to a place where I felt like I mastered the subject area. I was hitting whatever KPIs I needed to, and I wanted something new because otherwise I was worried I was going to get bored.
Yeah.
And I wanted the new challenge. What's the new thing? How do I figure it out? And it's not always for me about like what's the next level. So I wasn't always very concerned with the title chasing. It was really about what's the next challenge? How do I figure something new out? And I got headhunted into a content marketing agency that I had never heard of, called Brafton, to be a director of account management and manage a small team. And I had never managed people before. And it was incredibly challenging. I think that coming in from the outside into a director role has its own set of challenges because you have to build trust and learn how the team works and everybody's individual personalities and their strengths and weaknesses and people like that. But it is a little bit easier than getting promoted from an individual contributor role into a manager role
Yeah.
within your same organization, because there you're going from a peer set where people view you as a peer into a manager role. And that's a very tricky transition sometimes. So I do think I had it like slightly easier, but the real challenge for me is I had never managed people before. I had managed a group of swim teachers during the
wow.
summers between college. So I was the head swim instructor for a rec program where we taught small children how to swim. And that was fine because you're managing other swim teachers. But this was a totally new world. And I made so many mistakes for such a long time with so many of my staff. I didn't really understand the principles of management. I was going through a lot of it by feel. The company was very young and didn't have a big training infrastructure. So, compared to, say, like Morgan Stanley or Forrester, where I had worked previously, there wasn't the infrastructure set up to teach you how to do things. And that was great because I do like to learn and fail and move forward, but probably not great for my staff because they were on the receiving end of all of the mistakes that I made. And I really do value organizations now that have really strong people development programs and teams and pieces like that, because that first level manager for me is potentially more important than my job, than an SLT, than an ELT team. They're on the ground, they're developing, the individual contributors. And that role is really, really hard and really, really important in every organization. And I'm really glad that I spent so long in it because I think it helped me develop as a person and a manager.
Given what you've said, where you kind of joined the company, they were very, very young and they didn't have the training infrastructure to be able to help you progress and develop your skill set in the way that they probably needed you to. Fast forward to where you are today, with those learnings, how do you apply that to your teams? Kind of knowing that you want some of them to progress and kind of work their way up, what would you advise them to be doing, or what would you be doing to help them develop?
So we do have a management academy at my organization where senior leaders can nominate either first time managers or individual contributors with high potential to go through. It's a 90-day program to teach them management, people development, and leadership skills, which I think is fairly unique within the industry and also very important. I would also say I did a lot of individual learning. So somehow I, at some point at that organization, convinced my boss that I should be able to take MBA classes at MIT in Boston.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, I'm a good salesperson.
Yeah.
And those were eye-opening for me because there were so many pieces of leadership that I didn't understand. There were lots of places that I had strength and fundamentally understood things, but there were also places that I needed a lot of development. I listened to a ton of podcasts on leadership. I'm not a huge, I like fiction. I don't really read very many business books, but I will listen to a podcast about business all day long while I walk my dog. And those types of things have been super helpful, taking the classes, applying them, pieces like that. I also think that talking to other leaders and as people develop in their careers, you will have colleagues who advance or are within your peer set. And those pieces have always been super helpful for me. I've never joined Chief or any of those types of networks, but I think the informal network works really well for me, where I can talk to people about challenges and places like that. And also at this point now, I've been in my career for 20 years. And so I have lots of former peers or employees like Caroline who have gone on to work at other organizations, and being able to keep up on those relationships and, chat with each other, I think has been super helpful.
Which just speaks to the power of networking. And it's just something that I think is really undervalued. We have all of the tools, probably more than today than ever before, to connect with people exactly like how we are today, which is just incredible that we're able to do this virtually. Because pre-COVID, I'm not sure that this concept could have worked as well as it does right now. And so I feel very grateful to be in these situations where we can have these conversations and share such invaluable knowledge that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. Because like you say, you can read business books, you can listen to other podcasts and things, but to be able to kind of have this conversation as well is incredibly powerful. How would you that you spoke about networking before, and networking, it's how you used it to kind of migrate and pivot into your next roles. What do you think is the key to networking? Because I think people think networking is just going to events and kind of just standing there, maybe with a drink, but I'm in the room, so I've done some networking. But I think it's a bit more than that, right?
I'm actually not a huge fan of networking events, to be totally honest with you, for exactly the reason that you just talked about. So unfortunately, a lot of networking events that I've been to previously are either people who enjoy an open bar or people who are looking for a job. So, and that's fine. I mean, if you're job searching, I understand that you need to do that. But for me, it's rarely actually been about finding another job. It was once, but mostly for me, the networking now is catching up with people, understanding what they're doing, what they're working on, what their challenges are, sharing solutions, best practices, stuff that I'm doing that may be helpful to them, and vice versa. And it's much more casual. Networking is essentially friendship. And right. I think that one of the things that's super important is to understand who's that close circle of yours that you're going to lean on during times of grief, during really difficult situations. Who are you going to complain to that your kid isn't sleeping through the night? That's your close circle of friends. I'm not networking with those people. No. I'm supporting them. We're lifting each other up. I'm changing their kids' dirty diapers. Yeah. That is a different, that's family, right?
That's inner circle. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's your inner circle. But then there's lots of other people all over the place that you're keeping in touch with. And so for me, it's I text a lot. I like to keep up on text. That's my preferred form of communication and check in with people. I like getting together for drinks, and going out and catching up in pieces like that. And I think the other piece is like taking a real interest in what other people are doing. So it's not self-serving, right? Like it's not, I need this from you. I mean, sometimes I do need something from somebody. I
But
remember.
even then, it's how you frame it, right?
Right, it's how you frame it.
Right.
But I've sometimes I have a former colleague who's now an executive director at Group M, and sometimes I've leaned on him and said, "This is insane. We're in a crazy situation. Can I please talk to you about it?" And of course, he's happy to do it. But that's also because I've built the relationship where I know about his house and his house renovations and what they're doing and what his husband's doing and catching up and things like that. And I'm invested in him, and so he's invested in me. And so when I really need some advice or need something like that, or vice versa, he really needs something, that we have that kind of relationship already built. And that's simply because I'm super curious about people. I find people endlessly fascinating, and how they tick and how different they are from me. And I'm really curious about what people are doing and thinking and how they navigate things and how that's different from me. And so I think that curiosity is a really important part of networking. And the last thing I will say on this for folks who don't like networking is you just got to get over the fear, right? Everybody else in that room also doesn't want to network. They don't really want to take the first step because it's the most awkward date that has ever happened.
Yes.
And so you just have to take that step and be okay with being a little bit vulnerable or awkward or weird. And, it can be charming to be the first one to make the initial piece, and then give them lots of conversation pathways, give them lots of options for things to glom onto when you say something so that the conversation can be really interactive. And then suddenly you'll know somebody who does something interesting and they know that you do something interesting and you can keep in touch.
I think it's such invaluable advice because you've spoken about it from both ends, like both sides of the table in some ways. So being the person walking into that room, whether it is a networking drinks or whether it is kind of a meeting room, being able to take that first step just shows the level of confidence that you want to project to the room. Because actually, if I'm the individual on the other side and somebody has approached me, and actually there was an example, I was asked a few months ago to participate in, you guys call it Shark Tank, but we call it Dragon's Den.
I love Shark Tank.
Yeah. And so there was actually, it's one of the colleges locally to where I live, and they were running a Dragon's Den Shark Tank style competition for their students. And so I was asked to come and participate as a dragon and give my feedback to all of the different groups. And after the competition, the lead, the head teacher had essentially said, look, make use of the dragons in the room, go and speak to them, ask them questions. And I still remember to this day the people that did approach and the people that didn't. And you kind of want to give them the space to be able to do it. You want to be as approachable as possible sitting on this side of the table, because I can appreciate what that must feel like to go and start the conversation. But once you've got that opener and it's kind of a conversation starter, you're in. And as you say, you then kind of let the conversation flow naturally and always have a next step in your head. Kind of, what do you want the outcome to be of that conversation? Almost have those in your notes, like be prepared for these conversations. Because I find that that's the best way to get the outcomes that you want.
For sure. I also think a lot of folks really struggle with that confidence piece and with just taking the first step. And you spoke a little bit about it earlier, which is you can be highly intelligent, but not have enough EQ to be able to truly make it. And I do feel like that's incredibly important for women and all people to understand, is our jobs are eventually all going to be replaced by robots, but robots don't have EQ. And so, you got to lean into that piece,
Yes.
and have that confidence and be able to read a room. And that's something that I actually wish that more folks would talk more openly about and also work more on.
I completely agree, because the EQ part, I think also, it's not to say that I think men don't have it, because I think that they do, and I've met some incredible men and leaders that have very, very high EQ, and it's led them to be great mentors for me as well. But actually, I think being a woman, it's kind of one of our superpowers, and being able to lean into that in the best ways will produce kind of some of the best leaders from a female standpoint, which I kind of want to pivot a little bit, because I mentioned this in the beginning, you are a mother to two beautiful children. At what point did in your career think, right, now is the right time for me to pivot, start kind of growing a family? When did that conversation in your mind start to happen, and how did that manifest itself as it pertains to your work?
I think that, actually, going back to Sean in my early career, at some point in that mentorship, Sean had said to me, make sure that when you're ready to have a family, you are in a stable position. So you're in an organization that's stable, you're in a job that's stable, and you have a place that you can go through a very wild ride. Having children is a very wild ride in a place of stability. And eventually I got to a place at Brafton where I was in a role that felt good. I had a good relationship with my CEO. And I felt like, from a career perspective, that was the time. Now, from a personal perspective, that was not the time, though, because my husband at that time was in law school. And
Wow.
so we weren't going to have kids while he was in law school, because that was going to be a disaster. Right. And so we waited until he was done with law school and had graduated and taken the bar and had his first big firm job. And then we decided to have kids. So I think it's both the personal and the career, right? Like the timing needs to work. But I also know women who have had kids and changed jobs, and it's been okay and it's worked, really well for them. For me, the infant stage was really challenging. And I'm really glad that I wasn't also in a career flux where I was dealing with a lot of craziness on the infant side, but my job was fairly stable. So it was okay. I don't know if I would have handled flux in both areas particularly well.
This was pre-COVID, right? And so
Pre-COVID.
were you in the office a lot more? And how did you manage that? I think that there's this, I speak to a lot of women, and they talk about this feeling of guilt that they had because they still worked, they still wanted to go back to work. How did you feel about everything? And were you comfortable kind of going straight back into work? Or did you want to take some time?
With my first, I didn't want to go back to work. And I was part of a new moms group with kids under a year. And there was a second time mom in that group who said to me, go back, give it 6 months. And if you hate it, then quit. But don't just assume that it's not going to be okay. And I took that advice super seriously, because she had had 2 kids and gone back to work and, knew what she was talking about. But I didn't want to go back. I wanted to potentially be a stay-at-home mom or totally pivot my career. And I went back, and I was in the office, because this is pre-COVID and we didn't really work from home. And I know that's hard to believe now, but we didn't really work from home. And so we had a nanny. I left my 4-month-old with our nanny, and I went to work at 8 a.m. and I came home at 5 p.m. And that's how it was. For me, that was really good, because there was a hard stop between work and being a mom. So because I wasn't working out of the home, because my kid wasn't with me, I was able to really concentrate on work when it's work, and then leave work at work and come home and be a mom. And that was really good for me. When COVID happened and all of the preschools shut down, because at that time, both of my kids were in preschool, both of my kids came home. And And I'm really glad that they weren't infants. They were they were young children. But that was super hard because there was no difference between work and mom life. And that period of COVID was very hard for me until the preschools and the elementary schools, they reopened in Boston in September 2020. And so that was great. But that 6 months was super hard for me.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And this is, COVID is when you've migrated from manager role and you are now executive, you're now a C-level. How did COVID affect your teams and how did you respond to it kind of as the leader of the organization?
It was really hard. And in the middle of COVID, I also changed organizations completely. So I moved in 2020. I think so. I moved in 2020. I don't even know anymore. From Brafton, which was a Boston-based agency with offices in other countries in Chicago and San Francisco, to NP Digital, which is fully remote and global. And so I also changed jobs in the middle of COVID. In some ways, it was really hard when people are used to going to an office and then are suddenly remote. It completely changes the dynamic of the work. The interesting thing for me about NP Digital is that because there were people who were remote already, the teams were used to working in that remote atmosphere. And so that was helpful, but it's really hard. You're creating a completely remote workplace. You have to build a culture remotely. You have to figure out a way to connect with people and have authentic conversations like this. And it's really hard. But in some ways, I really like it for a couple of reasons, which is one of the things that we found is being remote, people are actually more engaged when they're like this because they're not having the constant hi in the hallway or you're constantly together. So people are really on when they're actually doing Zoom meetings and things like that. It really works for us. On the other hand, it's also really hard because team building and culture building, is difficult when you're remote. I'm really lucky that we have a really strong group of staff members who are very passionate about the brand, the company, the culture, and they're the culture leaders. I'm not really the culture leader. I mean, my job is to enable people to do their jobs. And so it's identifying who's the cheerleader. Great. How do we help them do more cheerleading? Because I don't need to be the chief camp officer, right?
Right.
That's not really what my role is. And we have folks here like Rachel and Jake and, Rob, who just do such a great job with that piece of it.
That's incredible. We talk about kind of your role and then we think about your teams. When you think about your new hires, what is it that you look for? What are kind of like the key ingredients that you would look for in a new hire and say, I would definitely want to speak to this person?
This is going to sound maybe a bit backwards, but I really like people who have worked in the service industry, either early in their career or as an adolescent, whether that be waitress, bartender, cook, or somebody who's worked retail. I love people who have worked at Sephora, because if you can deal with the customers that come into Sephora, you're going to do great in any job, right? Anything. Same thing with being a waitress. If you have been a waitress, you understand customer service. You understand crazy people, which is essentially what being in business is. So I love that. I love people who didn't have an internship at Fidelity or Morgan Stanley every single summer of their college. I want people who have been out there and interacting with the masses. So that's thing one. Thing two is I want folks who are resilient. who, can rise to a challenge. The only way, is through. That's what you got to do to move forward in life. People who are a little bit gritty, that really works for me. And then the last piece is I'm looking for somebody who I can get along with. I don't mean that we need to be the same or we need to be friends, but if we're going to spend 8 hours together, I fundamentally want to have some type of chemistry. And that can look like lots of different things. And there's lots of people that I work with who are not like me at all. And I love that. And they also don't agree with me. And I also love that. But we have a base level of being able to communicate that's really important.
They're all such great points. And I think one of my favorites was definitely the service industry one, because honestly, you're on the front line and you're absolutely right. If you can deal, with the difficult customers, whether it's in the Sephora or, the restaurants where they're not happy with the food that's been brought out, and you've now got to go be the bridge between them and the chef and negotiate that conversation, you are going to be successful anywhere. I remember my early days doing telesales, and you're cold calling people to make them give you money over the phone, which was like, are you crazy? I'm not giving you my card details over the phone. But actually, you hone in on a skill, which is, I think we spoke about this briefly before, but being a chameleon, understanding who you're speaking to and being able to make them feel comfortable by kind of helping match the way that they want to communicate and they want to speak is really, really helpful. If you could look back at, younger Sarah, so the Sarah we spoke about earlier, and you could give her a piece of advice, what would that advice be from where you are today to young Sarah?
Oh, be kinder to other people. Be a little bit more empathetic. I think that I didn't really understand kindness and empathy until I had kids, and I didn't have kids until my 30s. And so I spent a long time, I think, not being kind or empathetic enough to other people, above, below, peer set, who I worked with, who I managed. I didn't really understand that piece. And so I think that kindness really gets you further. You get more flies with honey than vinegar, and that's certainly
Love that.
it's certainly true in a way that I don't think I understood for a long time. I thought to myself, I'm so smart, and I will just bulldoze my way through this situation because obviously I'm right. And that might be true, by the way, but that's not actually how you accomplish things. And what's super interesting for me is the further I get in my career, the more I realize how little I know. I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So the further I get, the more I need to know, the more I need to learn, the more imposter syndrome I actually get, and this sense of, oh, I need to do more, I need to learn more, etc. And maybe that just comes with time. I'm actually not sure that 20-year-old Sarah would take that lesson because of who she was. She probably would have been like, you don't know what you're talking about.
And in that respect, you spoke about something there. So imposter syndrome, is that something that was very real for you as well? It's been very real for me in kind of the growth of my career, being in rooms, sitting in, board level rooms. I'm sitting at the table thinking, oh my God, like, should I really be in this room? But the moment I open my mouth and I recognize the value that I add to that conversation, I'm like, yeah, I should be in this room. How did you deal with imposter syndrome, if at all?
Oh no, I still have imposter syndrome. I think two things. One is the recognition that probably everybody else is also suffering from some level of anxiety being in the room, that everybody else is still essentially a child trapped in an adult body, right? We never truly lose that sense of our younger selves. And so it's very rare that you come across somebody in a boardroom who's like, I deserve to be here. And everybody, listen to me. Most people at that table are thinking, is what I'm saying intelligent? Is this good? Are other people getting anything out of what I'm saying? So recognizing that I'm not the only one levels the playing field. And then I think the second piece is I actually didn't have terrible imposter syndrome until I made a VP level. And then I thought to myself, what decision has he made? That was a wrong decision. He has no idea how terrible I'm going to be at this job. That was really it for me. At the manager and director level, I sort of felt like, oh, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Like, I got this. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
Then you get that VP role. And for me, that was the turning point. And now I definitely struggle with that every day. Again, I also think that it's really important to have those folks within an organization that believe in you and that recognize some type of skill set that you might not even recognize in yourself. And then the last piece is I find the imposter syndrome to be very motivating. So it's essentially fear. And if you can harness that fear to motivate yourself to learn something, do something, fix something, then that's harnessing the fear for good. And it's a way to move yourself and the organization and your people forward. So I try and think of it that way too.
That is incredible. And in terms of, because we love this, Sarah, by the way. So there's, from our perspective, there shouldn't be any imposter syndrome. I think you're absolutely phenomenal. And when you think of whether it's in your early career or even now kind of in your latter parts of the career, when you think of probably business meetings or when you wanted to have a big decision made, what was the shoe that you wore in that moment? Obviously, I ask because the podcast is called In Her Shoes, and we want to feel, every woman's power shoe.
Oh, for sure. So just to level set, my everyday shoe is a flip-flop. And right now, I am 100% barefoot because I don't wear shoes in my house. So this is not the shoe that I'm wearing currently, but at a huge business meeting. So I was just with my senior leadership team in Chicago. It is a 4-inch black suede closed-toed shoe with an ankle strap. And so I like a big stiletto power shoe. I am 5'10". I love being 6'2". Being 6'2" makes me feel like I can conquer the world. Yeah. I am on the same eye level as all of the men that report to me. I love that. It makes me feel so incredible. So yeah, a high heel for me, for sure.
I love the ankle strap. I feel like that detail is also important for support because I want to be able to walk at the same pace in these heels while we're walking in and out of that boardroom. No, I love it. Look, this conversation has been wonderful. And thank you so much for taking the time and speaking to us today on In Her Shoes.
It was so great to be here. I love talking to you and thanks for having me.